It's a privilege for me to reminisce about my father, Ellis Savage McAllister. Over the years, the memories have dimmed, but I feel so blessed because the memories, all the memories that I have of him are so sweet. Such a testament to the goodness and virtue of my father. I love him with all my heart, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to be able to share some memories about him. My dad was 6'1" tall, with thick black curly hair. He was a handsome man with a strong, muscular physique. He had a wonderful smile.
He was about 6 feet, I think, with dark curly wavy hair. Always a huge smile.
My memories of him, he was big. I was little, but he's a big man and very brown from all his time in the sun. I just remember he had these really large hands, and you could tell that he knew how to work hard.
He had big, strong hands. I remember that. Because I remember his gloves were always way too big for me to wear.
My dad had giant hands, and I didn't know it, but he was a little self-conscious about his hands because I guess they had been big his whole life, and as a child people made fun of him because of his big hands. But I didn't know that. I just felt engulfed in his hands. When he'd give you a hug, it wasn't just an arm hug. His hands would just engulf you. He had he almost could hold you in his hands, not just his arms, even when I was quite large, because his hands were so big. I think that was difficult for him because he had a hard time with small muscle coordination, and he had a hard time like picking up coins in his wallet. It was a challenge. He'd always have to dump them out because his fingers were very wide. But as a child, I felt so comforted by his hands.
I loved his hugs. When he hugged you, I don't know how to explain it. It was just because of the way he was built, and he was just such a warm and loving person. I can still feel his hugs. Nobody hugged me like Dad hugged me.
And he had a very soft, just a soft way about him. I remember him just putting his arm around me and just kind of that soft touch and very gentle. I remember he had a kind of broad shoulders and muscular frame.
And a big lap. I just remember snuggling down in his lap.
And I have to tell you the way he swam. After he lost his hair, so he had no hair at all, his head was totally bald, and he had a lovely shaped head. I mean, he didn't have a sprig on it. And he'd get on his swim trunks, and the only way I remember him swimming was the breaststroke. So he had these powerful shoulders, and he would just part the water, and from his waist up, there wasn't a drop on him. And he was just like this giant seal moving through the water. Do you remember that?
He was an elegant swimmer. I don't think the swimmer's as elegant, but he was.
Elegant swimmer, and he had an elegant way of moving. When he danced, it was Irma Snow. Carl was her brother. Dad and Irma Snow would win all these dance contests, and later, when I'd go to daddy-daughter dates with him and we'd have dances, I've never danced with anyone who danced like Dad. He was just so smooth and elegant and a fabulous, fabulous dancer.
No hair at all. All of my moms talked about how he had wonderful wavy brown hair that you see in Uncle Doug and your cousins. But
He didn't have any hair, but I remember I thought that's what all grandpas were like. All grandpas didn't have hair. That's what I thought.
He was so tall, and it wasn't his legs that were so tall, his torso was tall. And so he couldn't sit in a regular sized car because his head would rub on the ceiling as he drove, on the roof of the car, because he was so tall. And I remember every car we owned had a little spot in the inside of the roof where his head would rub, especially if he was wearing a hat, which he wore hats all the time. So he had to have large cars. We never had a small car.
And he always was well dressed, as was Mother. And Dad never went anywhere without polished shoes. He polished his shoes and polished his shoes. And that was just part of being ready. He usually did it the night before, so he was ready for whatever the next day.
And Grandpa, I remembered him in his gardening clothes, with his gloves and working in his tomatoes.
I remember him usually wearing like dress pants, like polyester slacks, it's the 70s, and like a dress shirt without a tie. And then sometimes he'd wear a hat, like when he'd garden, probably to protect his hair from the sun. But that's how I remember Grandpa.
I remember, and every time Grandpa went out, he wore his hat, and he'd always take his sunscreen. He'd always say some cute little thing about his head. But every time he wore it, was a blue hat with a little cording and then like a blue rim. And he always wore that. Looked very distinguished.
He was always very kind. He could be gregarious, but I remember him being more quiet, but also good-humored. Made people feel very much at ease.
Mellow is a good word. And yet, he had a sparkle.
He always had this twinkle in his eye and this wonderful smile.
He had a smile that lit up his whole head. When he would smile, it wasn't just a smile. I think just the wrinkles on his face or something, it just lit up his whole face.
When I think of him, I always think of a big smile on his face.
I wasn't very old when he passed away, but I remember that he was always smiling. I never once saw Grandpa frowning, he just always smiling. He was very cheerful.
The sense that I got was that, I don't know, his grin was almost impish to me, you know? He didn't strike me as somebody shy or reserved. He was quiet. He didn't say things unless he felt like they needed to be spoken. But he just seemed like he was brimming with fun too. So I don't know that I've known anybody quite like that. You just look at him and you just knew that there was just fun and laughter just right under the surface. He always had, you could just tell that he had a great sense of humor, was always so kind and loving to each of us. I can't think of him without that twinkle in his eye and wonderful smile.
And he had kind of a wry sense of humor.
He had kind of almost a Santa Claus chuckle. He had a very low voice, and he had a wonderful laugh.
What I remember most about Grandpa was his voice. And like I said before, there was just a calming, soothing about his voice.
I do not know what prompted my father to pen a small note on his glove, "A soft answer turneth away wrath." But I do know he was gifted with a soft answer. Growing up, I don't ever remember him raising his voice. In Helaman 5:30, words describe the voice of Christ. It was not a voice of thunder, neither was it a voice of great tumultuous noise, but it was a still voice of perfect mildness. My father had that kind of voice. He was also a very thrifty Scot. I remember my mother saying he could squeeze the nickel so the Indian on one side would ride the buffalo on the other.
He always saved money. He even when they needed to use all of their paycheck, he would always save some of it. I mean, even if it was just $10, one of the first things he did was, first thing he did was pay tithing, and then the next thing he would do was save money. And because he had done that, when they went to buy a house, they had $200 for a down payment.
The gospel of Jesus Christ was the foundation of Dad's life, and he took every opportunity to teach and reinforce its principles in our lives. All his life, he worked and served in the church. He was a bishop, a temple worker, a faithful home teacher, and a 70 back when 70s were the ward missionaries. He tried always to be obedient to the commandments and the words of the prophet.
Their callings in the church, they gave their whole selves to. And my dad definitely gave his whole self to being bishop. I mean, his every waking and probably every sleeping hour was spent thinking about serving or serving.
My dad always cried when he was tender about something, especially after he was bishop. It would be something special at home or with a child, or some tender feeling that would bring him to tears, usually in love for someone else.
I remember Dad looking at letters that Marsley and Marianne would send from Grand Canyon or from college, and he would, just a little tear would go down his eye. It was just so sweet. But I remember Dad particularly liking certain things, and I think because Mother made sure that he had those. So he loved pineapple upside down cake. He loved watermelon. He loved grape juice.
I remember him chopping, just the look of satisfaction on his face. He would slice a watermelon in half, and then he would slice each, and he would eat half of a watermelon just in one sitting,
He
just
loved,
him.
He loved wine. And cherry chocolates. He loved cherry chocolates.
And Dad was always a very clean, orderly person. He never seemed persnickety in the least, but I remember he would take his clothes off and he'd hang them up, and he'd, come in from the garden and he'd make sure that the mud was off his shoes before he walked in the house. And I remember he'd fold his garments when he put them in the dirty clothes hamper. And this was just something that he always did. He had these interesting habits that I saw later in Doug, and they were just dear little things. He'd wash his hands, and when he finished washing them at the sink, he'd go like this, and he'd flick the water off. And I remember the first time I saw Doug do that. It was definitely a masculine thing. And then the other thing was when he would speak at the pulpit, he would put his hands on either side of the pulpit. So he wasn't like this, and he wasn't like this, but he held the pulpit and he commanded the room, and he was a great speaker. Also, he spoke from notes. He didn't ever write talks out, and he knew how to outline. He'd been a debater in college.
My dad was a very hard worker. He was very strong. He'd been raised on a farm himself. He had a very strong work ethic. He was very muscular, and he loved to work. He often joked that it was his game of golf. That's how he relieved stress. That's where, when he had meditation time, and he could actually work out his frustrations and anxieties with a shovel or a hoe, tilling in the soil and working in the ground.
There was just this wonderful satisfaction in putting things in the ground and watching and harvesting them.
He found such happiness in the fruits of the earth. He loved working in the orchard and in the garden. We had an apricot tree, apple trees, peach trees.
He always had a shovel or a hoe or a pitchfork or something in his hand. Wheelbarrow. He would give us rides in the wheelbarrow. Yeah.
Because when I knew Grandpa, he had retired, and he liked to just work out hours and hours in his garden.
Dad loved to work outside. He loved to garden. He loved to feel the earth. He loved to see things grow. I think he loved to see people grow, like he loved to see the garden grow. And so that was probably his greatest love, was being outdoors, which is what he did all his growing up years. And seeing people grow, which is what he did all his adult life. And I guess mostly that's what he worked and played with us. He didn't ever play on his own.
Grandpa was very respected, and I know that people really looked up to him in the community.
My dad loved everybody, and everyone loved my dad.
I remember being raised on stories of how much the faculty and the students at Ben Lomond loved him, and what a great mediator he was. He was very, very loving and able to help people resolve their differences.
He was a mediator, a peacemaker. I think it's easier for me to have a clear understanding of my Heavenly Father because of the example of my earthly father.
He was a listener and an observer, and people loved him because he was so good at listening. I think he was honing that skill as a bishop.
He was genuinely interested in other people. He was a busy man, but he always seemed to have time to talk to you.
My dad was very loving. He was very patient. My mother used to complain that he could listen for hours to others who had problems or who were there for counseling. She used to chide him because there was a salesman, he sold shares of mutual funds that my dad would spend hours with. And my mom did not, or insurance salesman, that my mother just didn't know how he had the patience to spend so long with them.
Family was very important to my father. Out of 5 letters, which I picked up the other day, which he wrote to me, 4 of them said something about family. There is nothing greater in life than a good family. In another he wrote, there is nothing in this life that can quite equal a good family. In a third he wrote, there is nothing greater than a good family. And in the 4th, perhaps I have mentioned this before. Number 1, maintain good health. Number 2, raise a good family. 3, live the gospel. That was Dad's creed.
And grateful for a good family. Dad said that a lot. He was always grateful for Mother.
He cared about his children and his grandchildren.